Voice America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Friday weekend edition. We're so grateful you can join us. A little bit later, we'll open up the phones because we will be covering a number of issues. We'll be talking about the Ten Commandments. Will we have a government shutdown? What about some of the reaction to, of course, deportation, sanctuary cities? Who is funding some of anti-ICE protest and a variety of other issues that we will certainly post for you to read at your leisure, all available at the website pointofview.net. And again, let me just mention that we have Dr. Merrill Matthews, speaker, writer, and we've posted two of his articles today, as well as Holly Randall, Associate Counsel for First Liberty Institute. Holly, I start with you because one of the articles that we have posted is a defense of the Ten Commandments, and a lot of that comes from an individual we've interviewed 6 years ago and then just the other day, and that is Mark David Hall. For those of you watching online, I'm holding up his book called Did America Have a Christian Founding? He's an individual that's worked with you. He's at Regent University, and a lot of people have been kind of paying attention to this issue of Ten Commandments, in part because of some laws out of Texas and Louisiana that went to the Fifth Circuit Court. And then, of course, you've been working on one in Arkansas. Tell us more.
Yeah, we're really proud of Mark David Hall. He's a good friend to us at First Liberty and just a brilliant scholar in this area of Ten Commandments and our country's founding. I'll say the Supreme Court in the last, 5-10 years has really signaled, even further beyond that, has really signaled a shift to restoring our Establishment Clause jurisprudence to a history and tradition test. And so scholarship like people from Mark David Hall is incredibly important to inform citizens, judges, just helping get that research out there about what role Christianity and things like the Ten Commandments played at our nation's founding. So, I mean, you'll see Kelly Shackelford, First Liberty's CEO, just a few days, weeks, the time has run together in the snowstorm, was outside the Tarrant County, Texas courthouse unveiling a Ten Commandments monument, and that largely mirrors what is outside the Texas courthouse itself that the Supreme Court has already approved of in a case called Van Orden v. Perry. So we're thankful for Mark David Hall's scholarship and just what he is putting out there for people to read and be really informed.
Might just mention, too, that we have the link to RFIA, which stands for Restoring Faith in America. The other day we had Nathan Shackelford on the program talking about the fact that if you say, well, we don't have a Ten Commandments monument in front of our courthouse, the argument is, well, now that you have the freedom because of the Kennedy decision, you can do so.
That's right. After the Kennedy decision, a First Liberty case, and another case called American Legion versus American Humanist Association, which protected a large cross on state property, there is a lot more freedom for people to do things like set up a Ten Commandments monument in their public spaces. And so we are just, mere lawyers at First Liberty. We can't possibly blanket the country and all the good things that I'm sure people want to do. And so RFIA is an initiative of ours to just encourage people to act upon the freedom that the Supreme Court has really given them in the last, I guess American Legion was 2019, so in the last 7 years.
In the broader context of the Christian nationalism debate, we've been talking about this for a little while, as groups are saying, you're trying to make this country a Christian nation, which it was never was, and it really didn't have that element there, and you're trying to put it in there. But what these books are showing is that there was, we may not have been a Christian country, but we certainly had a lot of Christian influences in the country, from everywhere, from presidents to the writing of the Constitution, the writing of the Declaration. You have people with a Christian worldview in many cases, even if they aren't terribly active Christians, but almost all of the founders were active church members, and some of them were what we would call serious evangelicals. But that pervaded the country.
Yeah. And one of the other things I might just mention is you can go back and listen to the interview with Mark David Hall. Next week, I'm going to be in Georgia on the Thursday, in which you're going to be getting into that topic again, aren't you?
Right. We've got somebody coming in to discuss a new book out on the Jewish roots of American liberty. And what he's going to be talking about is how Jewish influences and Jewish Christian influences affected so much of our history, and it's in the founding, but also in the 1800s and on into our last century. So it's looking at how Christianity has played a major role and the Hebraic roots of Christianity in our worldview and our culture. Even if it's not being required by law, it's part of our history.
Might just hold up the booklets that we've had before for those of you watching online, One Nation Under God, the Bill of Rights, the Patriot Preachers, and many others. Matter of fact, we have one coming out on just a Christian view of the Declaration. And God is mentioned quite often, more implicitly in the Declaration. And when we keep hearing all these arguments about a godless Constitution and this was not a Christian nation, this is why on the 250th anniversary, we thought we'd come back and do some of that education. So you'll be talking about that on Thursday.
I'll be talking about that on Thursday.
Yeah. Well, okay. That's fun news. Let's get into this. We are maybe racing towards another shutdown. Now, the bottom line was Democrats have made a big deal about the Department of Homeland Security. We will get into that in much more detail. Then the argument was, okay, we can fund other parts of the government, but we'll only fund the Homeland Security funding bill for a short period of time. That looked like that might happen, but the Senate now is facing kind of what looks like an impasse, because by separating the Homeland Security funding bill from the 5 others, in order to move forward, what you need? Well, you need unanimous agreement, and they're having trouble both with Republicans and Democrats to get unanimous agreement. Any thoughts?
I'm not surprised that the issue of ICE funding has caused this sort of rift in the United States Senate, and I don't want to, give away too much of what we're going to talk about later with ICE, but I don't know about how you guys feel about it. I am a little shut down exhausted still. And so when I saw this headline, I just thought, oh my gosh, here we go again.
Yeah.
What could it be this time? But it's just a partial potential shutdown, right? So I don't know what that means. You'll maybe have to give us the intricacies of it. But I just, again,
I
really
think you represent everybody in the
feeling
listening
that I said
audience.
when I saw that news.
In the fall, they funded several parts. There's about 12
Yes.
different bills of the government. Right. They funded part of them, punted some of the others. Those are coming up now. Department of Homeland Security is one of them. There have been statements that Trump and Chuck Schumer have reached an agreement that I don't know where that stands right now, and I don't know what that agreement was that they allegedly reached.
Yeah.
But the general expectation is it will shut down for the weekend anyway, but they may be able to come to some kind of agreement at the beginning of the week.
Yeah. And I think, Holly, is speaking for most of America. We are exhausted with, first of all, having had the longest shutdown in the history of this republic. And then when you have people that aren't moving forward to unanimous consent, and on the Democratic side, they want ICE agents to wear body cams. They want ICE agents to remove their masks. I think that's a deal breaker, but we'll see. On the Republican side, they're saying, why should we even capitulate with them? Because Homeland Security deserves funding like the 5 other bills. And so getting unanimous consent in the Senate may be difficult, even if you've had agreement on the part of the leadership. So we'll see how that unfolds. I suspect on Monday we'll be talking about a partial shutdown. We'll see what that means. But it all brings us back to immigration and customs enforcement. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Ed Price writes about global economics and recently wrote to explain a mystery. After World War II, we assumed that we would have a vibrant international economy. When the Cold War ended, there seemed even more likely. Globalization would lead to a peaceful world and a stable economy. Instead, he says, we are seeing the stuff of diplomatic nightmares, international tensions, and competing territorial claims. There's an arms race in the South China Sea. There is ground war in Europe. He asks, what explains this mystery? Well, in 1970, President Nixon was forced by economic circumstances to no longer peg the dollar to gold. Thus, the U.S. adopted a fiat dollar, and this country had an unlimited money supply. He talks about the inflation of the 1970s all the way to the 2008 financial crisis and fiat finance wars in the Middle East. He does credit President Trump with one instinctive argument. If Uncle Sam buys foreign goods with his credit card, he will slowly destroy his credit score, erode his manufacturing base, and presumably lose his ability to fight a major war. This assessment is correct. For the last 50 years, this country has issued and exported paper currency. He notes that the French famously complained that this was an exorbitant privilege, but they and other nations know that it's really a burden to owning and operating an international financial system. He explains that the current system is undermining America. Ed Price ends his essay with this observation: there is no murder mystery here. It was Mr. Fiat in the drawing room with the printing press. We've solved the mystery. Now it's time to solve the problem. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we can get into some of the intricacies. Holly, I know you are an expert in this. Dr. Matthew is. I don't want to get too much into the deep weeds, but I think it'd be important to talk about how, as we say, sausage is made, and this idea of unanimous consent doesn't look like it's going to happen. So what's the next step?
Yeah, so the Senate works on unanimous consent on most things. And what that means is if there's nobody that disagrees with something, they will move forward. And because the Senate is meant to be kind of a gentlewoman's, club, they're supposed to be sort of working together, and they're harmonious in a sense, and we respect each other because we're senators. We're not just lowly members of the House. And so they go by unanimous consent. If one person disagrees with that, then they have to go through the vote, and to do that, they have to go through a closure vote. That's the filibuster, where you have to get 60 votes to close off debate, and then once you get the 60 votes to close off debate, then you have a regular up and down vote on a bill, and that's where so many Republicans and Democrats, depending on who's in control, have trouble getting past the 60 vote threshold, because Republicans have 53 senators now, something like that. Yeah. So they'd have to have 7 Democrats agree with them. John Fetterman, I've seen, has said he will vote for the DHS funding as it's done in the House. So that may be without the changes that Schumer wants. So that's one vote. They'd have to get 6 more in order to be able to close off debate, and then they'd have an up and down vote, and the Republicans would win that.
So we'll see how that unfolds. And again, I think Holly expresses exactly what most Americans are feeling right now. And just even the announcement that we have even a partial shutdown is going to have people just roll their eyes. And I think we're going to talk about the midterm elections in just a minute. But let's, if we can, get to one of the articles, which is pretty straightforward, and that is William McGurn says, well, sanctuary cities can be deadly. And he says, here's a way to prevent altercations and violence involving federal officers in the streets of Minneapolis. Order local police to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement and other agents enforcing the nation's immigration laws. Well, that's simple enough, right? The corollary ought to be obvious as well. Tell citizens exercising the right to protest not to get in the way of those enforcing the law. Unfortunately, that's not exactly what's happened right now. And I think he was wise to point out that on the one hand, you had Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem referred to an individual, of course, Alex Preddy, that we've talked about, as brandishing a gun. Doubtful that is the case for all sorts of reasons. Tim Walz referring to ICE as Trump's modern-day Gestapo. And at a time when we need some common sense and some cooler heads, Holly, we're having trouble finding them right now.
Oh, man. You would think the weather across the country this last week would help cool heads down, but it did nothing but, add it on. I think people were stuck in their house and watching a little too much news while we were all snowed in. And it's, everybody has an opinion. Everybody wants to share their take. And we've gone to 2 very polarized sides of the aisle on what's going on with ICE and what to do about it. And I think that's really a shame, because I think we all need to acknowledge you can kind of have 2 things be true at once. What's going on with ICE as far as the way that they have, acted towards some individuals that were exercising constitutional rights to protest in ways that were interfering with a lawful law enforcement investigation. Those have not been great. The Renee Good situation, the Alex Preddy situation, that has not reflected well on ICE. It's also not reflected well on the way that they're being protested. So I just think both sides of this debate have gone to such extremes that there should be, we should be able to look to things like mayors, police chiefs, governors of states to say, hey, citizens, let me straighten things out for you. I'm a, trusted person of authority that you voted into this position. But what we've seen is that's not exactly the case in places like Minneapolis and California. And, I know here in Texas, we've had numerous ICE operations, and you've not seen the headlines like you have in places like Minnesota. So there is a way to do it and do it well. And I just think right now we have a spotlight on a place that it's been done very poorly from all sides of the aisle.
Yeah, and it is so important to be able to have the Minnesota police or Minneapolis police there at their side, because you have checks and balances. You have one group saying maybe we shouldn't be doing this, and another one saying we should, but you have a sense of oversight with two different groups, perhaps with two different perspectives in that, and that's really important, especially if they're talking to each other. Now, our understanding is Tom Homan has gone, the border czar has gone there. He says he has been talking with Tim Walz and the others there, and they're working out an agreement where the two can manage to do a drawdown of some of the ICE forces there and to work more closely with the local police. And so if that happens, then I think that would end up being a very good benefit. But this is just the issue of power. Conservatives ought to be very skeptical of any government group having too much power. You want to have somebody overseeing that, some feedback and other things, so that you keep some restraint there. And it's hard for me to tell. It's hard for, I think, anybody who's not in Minneapolis to tell exactly where things are, because I've seen the Minneapolis police say they told us they didn't want us. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I've seen them saying, well, no, the police didn't want to work with us. I have no idea what's true there, but it would be good to have them working together, and that might constrain both of them a little bit.
One thing in this article, which I thought was interesting, one reason so many ICE agents are in Minnesota now is that every operation there needs not only agents to arrest the wanted person, but others to protect them. And, of course, one of the things Tom Holman has said is we're willing to reduce the number of ICE agents, but that implies that we need some help from local law enforcement. That seems reasonable.
Yeah, and I know a lot of us probably saw the picture of the little boy in the blue hat that was, the initial narrative around it was ICE ripped this boy from his family, and then we all kind of paused for a second, and the story I'm hearing now is more that the father fled from the boy to avoid law enforcement, and then ICE had to care for the abandoned child.
Took him to McDonald's and played music and fed him and all that, and finally.
So I think that illustrates a little bit what you're saying here is not only do you have to have enforcement agents, you have to have people then to care for the situation, what's going on, and who can we trust the story that's being told? Because I know the narrative that's happening. I mean, we saw it with Alex Preddy. Someone showed me a picture of, news stations potentially doctoring his appearance in photos that they were sharing of him. I think MSNBC might have been accused of that.
Yes.
So it's just there is a propaganda machine going on right now, and you really have to think critically about news stories that you're seeing. And
that brings us to AI. We were talking about that, too. I mean, there's one picture in the United States Senate the other day, and it was known to be an AI picture, and yet it was introduced to all the people watching it. So who do you trust for
you
sure?
Have to be very, very careful these days. And as Holly says, you've got these different narratives going on, almost completely competing narratives that are just completely different. And how an average person out here, and I'm in the news 2 or 3 hours a day going over the stories and stuff and trying to figure out exactly what's happening here. And then as soon as you think, okay, I've got this, you get a different story that says, oh, wait a minute, maybe that wasn't right. It's very hard for the American person, and it's not just by the way this is developing. This isn't working well for the Trump administration.
Right. Well, and again, let's give you a preview, because when we come back, all three of these articles all relate, because we're talking about sanctuary cities, then Dr. Merrill Matthews on the whole issue of Fourth Amendment and deportation, and then Tyler O'Neill, a piece that you and I were looking at, who's been funding the front lines of the anti-ICE operation. So all of these sort of come together, and we're going to kind of move back and forth between those. Even in this first article by William McGurn, we didn't get to one of the very important issues, which I really wanted to hear Holly speak to, and that is we had a church service, City Church in St. Paul on January 18th, and CNN, or former CNN host Don Lemon, who's now been arrested, I understand, was part of that. And so we really wanted to talk to that issue as well. So let's first of all go to a break. And if you want to join the conversation, love to hear your comments, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. You can find some of these articles because we kind of give you all sorts of different angles on this very complex and difficult to understand issue. But as we go to a break, let me just mention that also I mentioned just in passing that I'll be in Georgia next week because Dr. Matthews will be doing the Thursday program. And that Wednesday evening program, or actually Wednesday evening, we're having a meet and greet for those of you in Warner Robins, Georgia. So it is taking place at 5 o'clock. It's at Sonny's Barbecue. I've met people there before. So again, 5 o'clock Wednesday evening, there's a way in which you could let us know ahead of time and register for that. And so you can go online. You can call Jana Weidler. And again, that number is 972-692-1350. But I'll give it again a little bit later. But there also are just an opportunity for us to meet you face to face. And I can't wait to hear some of the face to face comments that I'm probably going to get there as well. Let's come back, though, just for a few minutes while we're talking about everything happening in Minneapolis. I didn't think that one of those wasn't on my bingo card, an interruption of a church service. We'll talk about that right after this.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now. Or call to invest at 1-800-347-5151, pointofview.net, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We have, of course, Merrill Matthews and Holly Randall. And Holly, let me come to you for just a minute, because on January 18th, you had the live streaming by former CNN host Don Lemon as all these trespassers came into the city's church in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's actually sort of between St. Paul and Minneapolis. It's a Southern Baptist church. And the issue was supposedly, and I will leave that for other people to sort out, one of the church pastors supposedly worked for ICE. Whether he did or not was not the issue. That was justification for going in and interrupting a worship service. We have a free speech right. We have the right to actually express ourselves, a freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. We also have the freedom of worship. That is the idea. And so in some respects, how do we sort all that out? Because the outrage that has come from even more than just the religious community is pretty significant to this event.
Yeah, my advice to anyone that's ever planning any sort of protest is talk to a lawyer first. And I know as a lawyer that sounds like self-interested advice, but had, Mr. Don Lemon from CNN and his co-conspirators probably consulted one, they would have been told there's a federal law called the FACE Act, which is, described as the freedom of access to clinic entrances. So it sounds like it protects, abortion clinics, and it does, from people that like to stand outside and do sort of counter-protesting, but it also protects churches and access to church services and worship services. And so as much as this group wanted to say, we have a First Amendment right, and yes, they do, they could have, they could have quietly stood on the sidewalk and made sure they weren't interfering with anyone's ability to get into the church and protest. They could have, I won't bore you guys with something called a forum analysis, which is what First Amendment lawyers do when we're looking at these issues of protest. But what they couldn't do was go inside the church and break the service up and demand that it's their First Amendment right to do so. And so that's why you've seen subsequent arrests. The Department of Justice has announced that they have already initiated criminal charges against some of these people, but the FACE Act also includes civil penalties. So I would expect to see not only some of these people potentially facing prison time, but also monetary, judgments against them in large amounts of money for what they've done. And just stepping apart from the lawyer side of me for a second, I mean, it's hard to watch those videos of them filming people that are just trying to, spend their Sunday morning worshiping. I saw a video of one of the men that's been arrested yelling at a woman that's about my age for drinking her latte in church on Sunday morning and worshiping. And I just think, that could have been me or someone I knew in this Southern Baptist church on a Sunday morning. And so it's just, there was kids crying. I mean, it looks so radical, and what they have done is against the law.
It's one of the dumbest things I've seen, especially when you're trying to win the narrative for the country.
There you go.
So if you're on the protester side and you're trying to make the case that we are saints out here, we're average people out protesting this government overreach, then you don't want to do something like this. And I'm mystified why they thought this was a good idea, because if you're trying to sort of pull away Donald Trump's supporters, an awful lot of church people go supporters of Donald Trump, and they're evangelicals and so forth, and seeing that might just immediately turn those people off, saying, even if I was inclined to believe that you're doing the Lord's work and protesting this looks like you're not doing it.
And again, what about Don Lemon? Again, he's a former CNN host. He wasn't necessarily doing anything except following them in. I think it will be very easy to prosecute some of the individuals that actually organize this. It'll be interesting to see what kind of charges are actually levied against Don Lemon and whether or not they really stick, don't you think?
Yeah, I think the one thing Don Lemon did that's going to be hard to get past is live streamed the whole thing from his very public account. And there's a clip of him that I watched. And, according to him, he's interviewing the pastor who's supposed to be up giving the sermon, but he's doing a little bit of scolding and yelling at him along the way. And so I think that's going to be a hard thing to overcome and make the argument that he didn't interrupt this church service and the ability of the people to worship at it.
Now, interestingly, Don Lemon calls himself an independent journalist now.
Yes.
So then does that fly? Is he a journalist and now getting certain First Amendment protections as being a journalist, being able to cover something, even if it doesn't quite look like a journalism to us?
So again, just a lot of issues surfacing there. But again, I'm going to move on. I'll give some of you a chance to weigh in. Would you allow this in your church? Do you have even security that would have prevented this, and what we might want to think about in the future? My wife and I and girls are going to a movie this weekend, and it's about Melania. And we're thinking, are there going to be protests out in front of a movie about Melania? And the bottom line is you just don't know. And there have been protests protesters out inside of my church protesting the pastor and some of the speakers and things like that. But this polarized society is something, Holly, that we need to pay attention to.
Well, it was, I think, just last week on Dallas Baptist campus. Did you hear this news? They were going to have a pastor from your church come speak, and so many threats got called in because he was there or coming to speak there. I mean, he's a member of the president's cabinet. This is a government official coming to speak to college students, and people were calling in horrific threats to the campus that they had to shut down all of Dallas Baptist campus briefly because of it. So it's just kind of appalling that we've fallen so far as to say we can't invite a member of the president's cabinet to a college campus without bringing on the onslaught of the threatening mafia.
Yeah, again, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Right. Every time I've been around him, he's had other individuals with things in their ears and dressed and probably, I'm sure, packing. And there are individuals, like we just mentioned a minute ago, the Secretary of Homeland Security living for a while on a military base. I hate to think of what it's like to be Tom Homan. And, of course, I looked it up because I saw the other day that the President Barack Obama had actually given him a particular medal and award that happened in 2015 for his service in deportation. And I think still you could say so far Barack Obama's deported more individuals than Donald Trump has. But of course, Donald Trump's been working at it for 1 year. And yet look at the difference in terms of what it was like for Tom Homan to receive an award from the president. Now, I think has to be having armed guards around him all the time.
But there's another narrative there. The Department of Justice was investigating him. The FBI had apparently given him a bag of $50,000 cash. And the Department of Justice was looking into that. And for influence peddling. Now, you shouldn't be taking a bag of $50,000 of cash, but influence peddling is the name of the game in Washington. That's that's called a lobbyist. You just have to register as such. So the Trump administration had the Department of Justice drop that investigation. So it's interesting times.
Oh, and certainly, again, just an illustration of how things have flipped. When we come back from the break, though, Dr. Matthews, we've posted your piece from The Hill, and we've got a couple of pieces, but this one in particular relates to, and I'll hold it up right now, I've got an advanced copy of our Outlook magazine, which talks about the midterm elections. There we think that some of the issues are going to be affordability, but I'm beginning to think deportation may be one of the bigger issues there as well. And you talk about how, in some respects, Democratic midterm campaign ads almost are writing themselves, because if indeed you have more people reacting to what has happened in Minneapolis, as you say, the ongoing images of the rough and tumble encounters with federal immigration enforcement might be front and center. So when we come back, we're going to talk about that, both from a legal point of view as well as a particular image point of view, because, as we say, the optics of going into a church in Minneapolis, or actually St. Paul, is something that didn't have good optics. And I think the city's churches will probably now, all of them will probably have a lot more security preventing that from happening again. But just imagine if it happened in your church, why that would be an issue as well. So we've got a couple of good articles for you to read, one on sanctuary cities, one by Dr. Matthews on deportation and the Fourth Amendment, and then probably we'll get to it in the second hour, a very good piece by Tyler O'Neill. Who's been paying for all of these anti-ICE operations? And he names names, and he helps you see where some of this comes from a dark money network. Some of it comes from well-known foundations and organizations. And so, again, if you find yourself always sort of wondering how that is funded, as we oftentimes have said on Point of View, follow the money. So we do so there. A little bit later, we'll get into some other issues, because there are other things to talk about besides Minnesota. We'll talk about whether or not some of these ideas being proposed by the president are making, Bernie Sanders happy and some of those individuals. And before we're all through, I'm looking forward to this one. Pastors using artificial intelligence to write their sermons. Oh, we have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
On January 13th, the United States Supreme Court heard oral arguments in two cases that are arguably the most important of the current term. At issue are laws passed in West Virginia and Idaho that protect female sports. According to these laws, only biological females may participate in women's sporting events. The American Civil Liberties Union challenged both laws in court. Their attorneys contend that these laws violate the civil rights of transgender athletes who are biological males seeking to compete with women. But on multiple occasions, these attorneys refused to answer a basic question asked by the justices. Here's Justice Samuel Alito questioning Kathleen Hartnett, the attorney representing a male Boise State University cross-country runner. For equal protection purposes, he asked, what does it mean to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman? Her answer, we do not have a definition for the court. Justice Alito asked a follow-up, how can a court determine whether there's discrimination on the basis of sex without knowing what sex means for equal protection purposes? Washington Post columnist Megan McArdle argues that these evasions do not help the trans inclusion cause. She says the left's contention that sex is not binary, but a social construct, a spectrum, an incomprehensible mystery, leads to an obvious problem. The case becomes not so much an argument for trans inclusion as it is for abolishing women's sports. The law, she writes, requires clear definitions. Alliance Defending Freedom agrees. In an email explaining their key role in both cases, ADF points out that a basic understanding of the differences between men and women led to the creation of women's sports in the first place. That same understanding led more than half of the states to pass laws protecting female athletes from having to compete against males. Megan McArdle says the left's insistence that gender identity always trumps biology probably means their side will lose this case. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talk about Minneapolis, Minnesota, of course, California, but those places where, as Dr. Merrill Matthews says, and this is the article in The Hill, the Democratic midterm campaigns add them, or really write themselves, and that's because of some of these ongoing images of these encounters with federal immigration enforcement. Even if there is a pullback, even if there is maybe less deportation taking place, say, 3 months from now, these will live on in terms of videos. And so, first of all, there is the issue, Dr. Matthews, of the image and the visuals and the visual images. The second, as you're raising here, is the question of the Fourth Amendment. So I thought we would get into both.
Right. And you, in the images and the campaign ads, you won't get to see all the context.
Yes.
You will get to see half a dozen ICE agents surrounding a person, pushing him on the ground, kneeling on him and other things, which may or may not have been justified at the time. We don't always know that. But it's a very tough image when people look like they're in tactical gear, they've got weapons, they've got masks on, and you've got a person who looks like just an average person, and then you've got a lot of people, protesters in the back, perhaps, that look like just average Americans, regardless of whether or not they're being paid and other things to do that. So it's a very bad image, and I think you're going to see Democratic candidates running something like that, saying this is life under the Trump administration, and that's why you need to vote for Democrats for the House and Senate. And typically in a midterm election, after the president's first elected, that's what we have coming up in November, the party that's not in power wins seats and takes over. That's the general expectation is that's probably going to happen anyway because there's such a small Republican majority in there. But you could have a wave election if these ads start resonating with the public.
One of the concerns I have is it gets back to what Holly said just a minute ago. The bait boy story is no more true than Charlottesville or Jussie Smollett. We now know that is a fake story, and yet I still hear people mentioning it.
The picture is everywhere.
Yes, and so there's a sense in which, as you point out, Dr. Matthews, we're not just talking about the fact that there were some really bad shoots, bad situations, maybe overreaction from an ICE agent. I would say, people say, well, are you surprised? I said, no, it's a government program.
Yeah.
Government programs almost always have problems, you know? And so, yes, but when they are taking even false stories and the mainstream media, and I'm not even sure right now if all those people that do the fact checks are even dismissing the bait boy story yet, those almost have a life of their own, don't they?
Oh, yeah. The stories and the fact checkers, it's almost like who's checking the fact checkers is what you wonder sometimes. But something that I think, to your point, Dr. Matthews, that the Trump administration or the conservatives here are maybe overlooking with all of this is the impact of the libertarian vote, because that can be a swing factor in some elections.
Right.
And there's a real libertarian streak in me that sees this ICE stuff going on and gets a little alarmed. And so I think that is something that we're losing that vote as conservatives with every picture that looks like law enforcement taking down an American citizen.
There have been polls of independents and Hispanics and even some blacks who have been shifting back away, who said, I voted for Trump last year, but I'm no longer supporting him in that same way, or I'm concerned about that support. So that's a warning sign for Republicans, and I think that's one of the reasons why Trump has finally gotten the message that he needs to try to address this issue and get it past him. Even though the images and the video will live on, he wants to try to get this past the public so that it's not covering the media right now as it's covering it.
One of the issues that you raise is, of course, the Fourth Amendment, and you have seen some evidence that the Department of Homeland Security is really ignoring the Fourth Amendment, which, again, is of concern because you have to have probable cause and you have these administrative warrants. And the argument, not that I completely agree with it, but let me try to make the case from the people in Minnesota, is in some cases you're picking up people for which they have not been convicted of a crime. There's only a warrant for them. And in some respects, that's where the drop-off is. The other day I talked about the surveys, and they show that if you ask Americans, would you think that we should continue to deport people with a criminal record? 80%. Should we deport people who don't have a criminal record? 55%. And so in some respects, once you start getting rid of, as we said, the worst of the worst, that's where this problem begins to affect you in the election even more significantly, doesn't it?
Right, yes. And before, under the Fourth Amendment, before law enforcement, in this case ICE, can enter a house, they have to go to a judge, supposedly an impartial judge, get a warrant, demonstrate probable cause, and then they get the warrant to go in. So that's the Fourth Amendment. Administrative warrants allow somebody in the agency to sort of, you don't have to go through an impartial judge. Somebody in the agency that they're working for can make this warrant, and so it allows them to expedite the process. They don't have to go through a judge and do probable cause. If you're going to do that, you better make darn sure you're doing a good job and you're not making mistakes. And there have been some mistakes, and I suspect a lot of our listeners have seen the one of the Hmong, I think they call it Hmong, man who was in his house. They knock on the door, they bust open the door, they take him out. He's in kind of his underwear with some clogs on or something, and a blanket wrapped around him, and he doesn't even have a shirt on. And it's maybe 0 degrees or 2 or 3 degrees outside, and they escort him out. A little later, they bring him back to his house and don't do any charges. He says in the interview that he said, "Can I get my identification? I'm an American citizen, naturalized citizen." They didn't want any of that. They just took him right out. That's the kind of ad I think you'll see pop up, which looks like it just looks like you're overreaching this from the government standpoint.
Years ago, we had John Whitehead on, and we had him on again just a few days ago. And John Whitehead pointed out that once you started putting people in military gear, what happened oftentimes was these no-knock SWAT attempts and all the rest. And there is, I think, even more of a need for some kind of check and balance, because pretty soon you you start thinking of yourself in terms of the military, and as individuals that believe in liberty and rights and conservative values, that should be concerning to, I think, all Americans.
Right. And one of the administration people from the Department of Justice wrote a article for the Wall Street Journal saying illegal aliens do not have the same rights as American citizens, but they do have some rights. And there's a long debate as to what rights they have. That's been going on for some time. But the point I make is, if you have an administration which is very restrained in its use of power, then you might say, okay, well, administrative warrants, okay, because we know you're reluctant to do this. But this administration has not been so very restrained. President Trump has made it clear, I want to effect as much power as I can because I think I'm guaranteed that under the Constitution.
It was interesting because when we first did an interview with John Whitehead, that was when Barack Obama was president, and we were talking about some of the things that were happening even then, because he was, even by some of the liberals, being accused as being the deporter in chief, even then. I don't have to remind too many of our listeners that some of the weaponization of power was happening under Joe Biden, and I think we should be concerned about it now as well. So you raised some good questions. The big question I have, and nothing else, maybe to bring us back to the issue of prayer, we should say that some people in these administrations say, Mr. President or Madam Secretary, maybe we need to redo some of this. And sending Tom Homan in there, I'm hoping, is a positive, but I guess we will find out soon enough. When we come back, you've been waiting for this. Who's paying for all of this anti-ICE operation? This is a very well-written piece by Tyler O'Neill. We've quoted him before, and it's a piece that Dr. Matthews and I shared back and forth. So if you wondered who's been paying for all these protests, they're not spontaneous. I'll give you the spoiler alert. We'll come back and talk about that right after this.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Merrill Matthews, Holly Randall, and Dr. Matthews, I'll come to you because you first saw this, although I've been following over the years some of the good research that Tyler O'Neill has done. And one of the lines, this goes all the way back to the founder of Point of View, Marlon Maddox, follow the money. And I've had a few people saying, okay, who's funding all of this? Well, this goes into a pretty significant detail of individuals that are being funded, and it has to do with the group called Copal Educational Fund. That is actually the acronym for the Spanish. I won't go into trying to explain all of that. And so this is a group that is, of course, an educational fund, but is also a group that's set up an immigrant defense network. Individuals supposed to be legal observers. And as a result, really, the New York Times has admitted and described them as being on the front lines of the anti-ICE operation. So anybody that thinks much of this is spontaneous, no, it's pretty organized, and it is well funded, isn't it?
I assume COPOL is a 501c3, and if you're a 501c3, then you don't have to reveal your donors. So the media occasionally go out and look around, try to figure out who's actually giving this group money. I've been with think tanks for 35 years, and they were 501c3s, so we didn't have to reveal our donors. But all the groups end up they get money from individuals. They get money from some businesses, and they get money from various foundations. And some of those foundations may be the George Soros Foundation on the left, could be the Koch Foundation on the right. But yes, money flows into these things as they try to promote them. That's done on both sides. I wrote about this 3 or 4 years ago. Primarily, it's perfectly legal for this to happen. I was writing about were Russians funding some of the environmental groups that were opposing fracking and other things of that nature, and it was clear that they were doing it in the United Kingdom. I think there was some evidence that it was happening in the U.S. as well. So you always want to go back and try to find where the funding is coming from, and that tells you some things. It doesn't mean it's illegal, but it does give you an insight as to who's behind some of the events that are going on.
So again, one of the things I think we need to recognize is that these are a variety of different groups that are funding them, and I'll just rattle a few off because I would encourage people to get this and read it. The New Venture Fund, which is one of the leftist nonprofits working with them. They work with Sunflower Services. The 1630 Fund, which I have heard about before, and that's a 501c4, but nevertheless is aligned with that. You also have the Tides Foundation. We have talked about that group over time. And of course, can I mention George Soros and some of the people associated with that? So yes, these are indeed funding avenues and thus provide the opportunity. And I've seen, and maybe Holly, you've seen some of these videos on YouTube where they'll show an individual in one protest, and then they'll show that individual's another protest, same individual at a separate one. And so some of these literally are professional protesters.
Yeah, one of the men arrested in the city's church incident that we talked about earlier has been seen at protests across the country. So he's sort of making a career out of it, I guess. But what's interesting to me is that in this article, it points out there's a handbook for constitutional observers.
There you go.
That specifically states, do not, in all caps, obstruct an arrest under any, in all caps, circumstances, and don't run or resist if stopped by law enforcement.
Which
so we're not even reading the handbook anymore. Which
protects them in being able to do the handbook.
They just did it knowing full well they're going to do it, but then they can't be sued. Yes, go ahead.
So anyway, yes, I think that, and that goes on, and this goes back, the left has been doing various kinds of tactics for this, for protesting and so forth, for decades. This is the standard kind of thing that they do. There is a narrative out there, though, I think, and I picked this up on Fox and some places, that because there are some professional protesters, that you can't trust any of these. These are all professional protesters. A lot of these people are just average people who are out there.
They're serious,
just as we have, when you have a march on Washington, you have some people there who are paid, who work for pro-life organizations.
Sure, the March for Life.
March for Life. But you have just thousands of people show up because they agree with this issue. In Minnesota, it's generally a blue state, so you would expect a good many people to support that side. But yes, it's a lot of this is coordinated. They use signal to let people know where ICE is moving and so forth. There's more coordination than you might see or hear from in the media.
Well, and again, I think it's important that, remember when we had the Tea Party protests. We're old enough to remember that at least. And
I was at the Tea Party protest when it marched on Washington in September of 2009.
You can remember that, again, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, said, well, it's all AstroTurf.
Yes.
And I don't want to say that all this is AstroTurf because that's always the typical reaction from the left to the right and the right to the left. There are individuals here who are professional protesters, and then there are other people that are following along. And in some respects, that goes back to they're taking their signals maybe not from Copal. They may be just taking their signals from the governor or the mayor. And again, I love what you say just a minute ago, Holly. Yes, it says, do not obstruct any arrest under any circumstances, and these are in caps. Do not run or resist. But then they also point out the fact that people have been blowing whistles. And he said, well, yeah, we do provide the books, and the whistle is part of it. So, yes, I'll give you a whistle, but I'm not encouraging
we don't
you
encourage them to use a whistle.
So you can see what they're doing. They're protecting themselves from a lawsuit. But they are fully understanding and maybe even expecting that you're going to have some people that are just going to be unhinged, and those individuals are the most likely to then be arrested, and those are the ones that are going to get to be filmed. And the argument they make is, look, we are in the business of documenting this, and then you have some people saying we're documenting this because eventually there's going to be an inquisition. We're going to, if we are in power, we're going to take these people on, and that may be the case, but it's becoming more and more obvious that even if they have a phone in their hands, sometimes they also have a gun in their hip. And so these are getting more and more dangerous all the time. And if we can't find at least some individuals, whether it's a mayor, a governor, leaders of ICE, Homeland Security, somebody, we are going to have more of these stories we'll be talking about here on Point of View.
While some of this is sort of evolved and new, going back to Saul Alinsky and the book Rules for Radicals, the left has sort of established ways that you do these things long ago, and they've evolved some, but that's part of what they do.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some other issues. But if you want this article, it is 4 pages, and I think Tyler O'Neill, as always, has done a good job of following the money, so you know where it came from. Just a few minutes ago, I mentioned the fact that we are having a meet and greet in Warner Robins. Now we've posted on the website, pointofview.net. Just go to the right-hand column. There's a place where you can register, because Wednesday at 5 o'clock, I'm going to be at Sonny's Barbecue, and I'm eating barbecue, and I'd love to eat barbecue with you. So again, and of course, I won't be here Thursday because Dr. Merrill Matthews will be doing the program on Thursday.
This will be Georgia barbecue?
This will be Georgia barbecue.
Not good Texas barbecue?
Oh, I think all of them are good. I'll take a Kansas City. I'll take South Carolina. I'll take it all. But anyway, we will see you if you're in Warner Robins or can drive there Wednesday at 5 o'clock. And you just need to register. And that's on the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A Pew survey from last year found that a significant number of Americans believe that socialism gives all people an equal opportunity to be successful. A quarter agree with that statement, with another quarter agreeing with it somewhat. Vance Ginn, writing in the Washington Examiner, is alarmed that most people who favor socialism don't understand it or its negative consequences. They may be motivated by emotional appeals to fairness and equity, but are unaware of the miserable history of the failed socialist experiments. In my booklet on a biblical view on socialism, I quote from a recent book by Dinesh D'Souza. He lists 25 countries that have tried socialism and all failed. Vance Ginn uses a glass ceiling analogy to illustrate the problem with socialism. He says people in socialist economies work under a glass ceiling that they can never break. They surrender so much of their resources to the government that it contributes to a forced mediocrity. Contrast this with capitalist economies where the ceiling is much higher. People have more potential to prosper because the means of capitalism and labor are owned by them personally, not by politicians. He argues that greater economic freedom under capitalism tends to yield higher life expectancies, higher incomes, greater per capita GDP, and less poverty. In my video presentations on capitalism and socialism, I display a slide with a graph that shows the correlation between GDP and economic freedom. capitalism provides both freedom and economic success. We need to get these economic facts to the next generation, especially before the next election. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One of the articles we posted by Christian Snyder is This Way to the Socialist Ball. Now, what he is doing is actually raising the same criticism that we've talked about with David Bahnsen. And Dr. Matthews and I go all the way back to a guy by the name of Greg Bahnsen. And apparently you even have on your shelf some of his books. And he was a theologian.
Right.
And a post-millennial theologian. We're not agreeing with all the things he said. But David Bahnsen, interestingly enough, has been an individual that's been very much involved in working to try to make sure that we get a lot of the wokeism out of these major corporations. And the other day, again, a very conservative individual, to put it mildly, nevertheless said, look, I'm a conservative. I like Donald Trump. I agree with much of what Donald Trump has done, although I think he had some questions about the tariffs. But when it came to what this article talks about, these, I think, are ideas that don't make any sense. And he had better and stronger words, but I'm trying to be nice here. And what we're talking about, and we've talked about this before on the program, so let's get into it for a little bit. Donald Trump, I think, recognizing that he'd like to win the midterms, has said, well, it's just too bad that people are paying too much for their credit cards. And so he not only has said this, but he even said at the World Economic Forum that we want to cap 10% cap on credit card fees. When the other day I was talking with my producer, and he was looking at one where it was, 34% interest?
Typically in the 20s.
Yes, which would make even some people in the mafia blush a little bit, I think. Then he also wants to ban these major corporations from purchasing single-family homes. And then one other one that Christian Snyder has mentioned, which we haven't talked about, wants the government to purchase 10% stake in Intel. Now, I've never polled you, Dr. Matthews, but I'm pretty sure you would agree with David Bahnsen and would agree with this author, but have at it, because these are some issues which I understand why he wants to do that. He wants to help individuals that want to buy a home, people that are the age of Holly Randall. He wants to help people that have massive credit card debts. But this is a solution that is going to, I think, make the problem worse.
I was looking into the issue on the homes because of what President Trump has been proposing, because the institutional investors in that are really a small percentage of homes. Yeah. You have a lot of moms and pops. In fact, years ago when I was an undergraduate in real estate, residential real estate, I bought a home that rented out because I thought I might be a real estate magnate or something. Yeah. It didn't work out very well. I don't recommend that to most people, but
it's not an easy job.
I was trying to do flipping long before they tried to do that. But, you know, in a lot of times you have husband and wife buy 3 or 4 homes. They use that for retirement. But the notion that you keep the movement right now, especially younger people, is to move towards renting. They prefer renting, many of them say, whereas my generation, the goal was we want to get a home, we want to pay for it, get it paid for, and now we're good and set. But a lot of the younger people prefer renting as opposed to buying, and so the institutional places oftentimes are taking these homes and making them into rental property, which you need those. They're not destroying homes. What you need is more homes out there, and there have been places, especially in California, that have so many restrictions, it's hard to build new homes. They haven't even gotten the Pacific Palisades started going yet because of all the regulations they have there.
Well, and again, I was just going to mention that because I went and looked at which state has built more homes than any other state. Texas, no surprise there. But which states have actually built the fewest, and California's on the top of that list. Mm-hmm. And again, part of that gets back to rules and regulations. And Holly, speak for your generation. Obviously, it's not just you, but your generation, whether you're Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, the so-called next generation, we just did one of those broadcasts yesterday, they are saying, saying, look, I don't know that I'll ever own a home, but there are ways to actually begin to bring the prices down. One is to bring the interest rates down. Another is to actually produce homes that are better starter homes and things of that nature. And so there are answers to this question, and yet Donald Trump thinks that the best answer is to ban large institutional investors, of which there are some that have gone in and purchased a home that a couple could have picked up. But I think it's a solution that isn't necessarily needed right now for the bigger problem of home ownership.
Yeah, I'm sure he's kind of aiming at that as a symptom of other problems as well, that he's worried about foreign influence on property ownership, things like that. But yeah, I mean, you've said it right about my generation. We're owning homes. I don't have statistics on it, but just polling, myself and my immediate friends, we are not owning homes like our parents did and our grandparents did. And part of that is, we're in Dallas, where owning a home within a reasonable mileage of where we work in downtown Dallas or in Richardson and the closer in suburbs, it's just supply and demand is out of control. And so there are the options. You can move way far out into the suburbs. And so I think in some regards, you may see some just growth of, we're talking about the Dallas area suburbs, I'm sure it's happening in other cities, are springing up out of control and having extremely young populations. If you looked at Frisco age versus Dallas age, I think you'd see that. So we're getting kind of a age segregation almost of where younger people have to go to buy homes compared to more older established finances can live closer into cities.
Yeah.
And I just find that younger people in general prefer to rent. I've seen people say, I don't even want to buy my furniture. I want to rent my furniture because when I decide to move, I can just let it go and I can go somewhere else. And I'm not encumbered by all these things. But just on the interest rate, they are right now, they're still a little high from where they've been for the past several years. But I was looking the other day, I was going through things for my parents, found the home that they bought in 1976 in Plano. I looked at the interest rate, 8.75%. In 1976. It was a high interest rate then, and interest rates went even higher for a while. So but the other thing that really has puzzled people is Trump has been interviewed saying, I don't want the price of homes going down, I want the price of homes going up, which seemed a little puzzling. I'm not trying to push prices of homes down, but if prices go up, it makes it even harder for people to be able to get in them.
And again, there is a very good reason why these prices are going up. The house is not worth more, the dollars are worth less.
Yeah.
Dollars are worth less, and supply is sometimes not there.
Supply and all that. I mean, I've been in the same house for 10 years, okay? And the house is worth less because the carpet is older, the house is older. We put in a new hot water heater and one new air conditioner, but everything else is 10 years older. So it is worth a lot less than it was 10 years ago. But according to the people that are telling me how much I have to pay for property tax, it's worth twice as much. And that's because the dollar is worth half as much. And there are some very good reasons why that is working. So those are some, I think, important issues. But Dr. Matthews, real quickly, the other one, the government funding or wanting to actually buy into corporations like Intel, the proper definition of fascism, which has been completely redefined, is that, right? Where government begins in partnership with private industry.
Right.
That is the former definition of fascism.
And one of the new things that Donald Trump has introduced is, yes, you can, in NVIDIA, you can sell chips to China, but you got to give us 25% of those chips. The president is getting involved in, you've got U.S. Steel. He allowed a merger to go forward, but he has what's called a golden share, which allows them to be able to vote in decisions and make decisions that the board of directors would normally make. So he's getting government much more involved in business, and I'm not sure this is going to work out well long term.
Well, again, he's an entrepreneur. He's a real estate individual, which is why we keep talking about Green. Oh, we haven't even talked about Greenland today, have we? Although we called it Iceland the other day, but Greenland, whatever, and those kind of things. But again, there I think are going to need to be some people in the administration say, Mr. President, I know your instincts are good. That is, you want to lower credit card fees, and I think the instincts are good. You want to have more people being able to buy single-family homes, but these policies are not going to work. And we wanted to post that article. David Bahnsen talked about it. Christian Schneider talks about it. And the joke is that these are the kind of things you thought you'd hear Bernie Sanders talking about, and here we have the president talking about it. We come back. I've been postponing it long enough. Where are pastors? Are they actually using AI to write their sermons? And apparently, again, this is a very good piece from Leonardo Belair. I've quoted from him before, and Christian post on this whole issue and how to think that through. Penn and Dexter's piece on women's sports case. I knew I was going to have Holly speak on that issue. So we got a few more things to cover in the last half hour, but if you find yourself liking to or wanting to maybe read some of these articles and then liking them and passing them on to others, those are available at the website, pointofview.net. And, of course, we also have that place for you to register. If you'd like to meet me for barbecue on Wednesday night, I'd be glad to share a barbecue with you. So that's for those of you in Warner Robins. There'll be some other opportunities for you to meet other people, but let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let's see if we can take a phone call or two. 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Merrill Matthews, Holly Randall. We'll head out to Arizona first. KNLV, Edward, thank you for calling today.
Well, good morning, Kerby and the crew. This is Ed and Lana. We met you before in Prescott at your get-together. Remember that?
I do, and I'm looking forward to getting up there again. Go ahead.
Oh, I do, too. And then we were at Lake Havasu, too, and greeted you, too.
I remember that both times. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to throw in the property tax issue when buying a house, too. I remember when I sold my house in California, the person that bought my house have a 1% property tax on the selling price. So my house, I had many years. I sold it for double what I paid for it. And that person had to pay about $4,000 a year in property tax back then. And this is 20-some years ago. So I think that might be an issue, too, in home buying. I don't know how your guys thinking about it there. And
good point.
For the young people.
And we've had Edward, somebody calling in a while back, and she was saying, eventually the property tax will force me out of my home. Because when I bought it, it was a starter home, and my husband and I, now he's passed away, I'm here paying, I've paid off the house, but the property tax is about ready to push me out the door. And that's something, Holly, you and I were just talking about off the air, because you never really own your home. You think you own it even when you paid it off, but just don't pay the property tax one 1 year and find out what happens.
Yeah, and there's been, I know in Texas and states like Tennessee, I think is the same as us, there is not state income tax, and so our property tax is sky high here in this state and places that follow that model. And so they've had some creative solutions to help people that are on fixed incomes. I know when you're, I think, 65 in Texas, your property tax freezes, but that doesn't help those of us that have just turned 30. I'm looking at 35 years of property taxes increasing on a home that, you want to buy in a good location and you hope that builds, equity in your home. But then you realize now I'm having to pay more for it. So it just feels like some of us on the younger end are in a little bit of a squeeze.
And one of the things that Texas has done in some states they're trying to limit the property tax because the increase in the houses prices have gone so high that it would almost be a windfall for states if they're taking a huge property tax. So Texas has lowered its property tax, especially in some cases, and even forced cities and counties to lower theirs so that they don't, so that you're not just creating this windfall just because the value of the property is rising significantly.
Well, again, we used to talk about the American dream, owning your home, and there we're starting to find, Edward, that people have that as a dream, but it seems to be kind of a fading dream, and I think you've raised a very good question there as well.
Yeah, I do agree with property taxes, police and fire, and your K-12. I don't know if I necessarily believe that property taxes should support higher education, like we had a community college, and $500 to $700 of my property tax goes for that, and then the students still have to go there and pay a fee every time they go to a class. So I don't know. I'm kind of mixed feelings on higher education after hearing what happened at Harvard University and all the money they get from the federal government, and then and then all the endowments they have. I just go crazy. And I know you've had higher education, Kerby, and I was an apprentice in the electrical trade, so that's my higher education.
And Dr. Matthews says PhD, so you have
electricians do very well.
Yeah,
better than you did.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
I did. I had a good trade there. I really like it. I miss it too, but I'm retired now, and I couldn't go back to work there doing that. But thank you very much. God bless you all, and we'll keep supporting you, Dr. Kerby. We love your show, and it's been a godsend for us to listen to you and find out good information. And like Lana was just saying, she says Kerby does a lot of studying and on all the issues, and that's great, Kerby.
Well, thank you. And look forward to seeing you again up there in Prescott. And learn to say Prescott, not Prescott. Prescott. And again, just some of the radio stations, and that's one of the advantages we have. As I mentioned just a minute ago, if you are in the Georgia area and like to come to be with us, I imagine if you're in Macon, you could make your way down to Warner Robins. We're going to have some barbecue. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, I've postponed it long enough. You passed this on to me. And again, it comes from Leonardo Blair. He's a reporter for Christian Post. Majority of pastors now using AI to prepare sermons amid rapid embrace of technology and the study. And a lot of that comes to ChatGPT. I've got a commentary coming out in which one of the individuals writing this said, imagine if you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table in 2022 and somebody says, when do you think AI will have 1 million users? And some of you might say, well, next 2 years. Some might say the next 10 years. How about next Monday? It turns out that on December 5th, ChatGPT 3.5 had 1 million users. So that just shows you how quickly this technology has made its way into probably some of the computers you guys are using right now. I don't know. But it's also made its way into the pulpit. And that was why we thought we might talk about this today.
You know, I just found it so interesting because to me, it raises theological questions. If I'm a pastor and I'm trying to prepare my sermon, I'm waiting for the Lord to lead me on preparing the sermon. Can the Lord lead AI as well as the Lord leads me? I think in most of these cases, it becomes, they may put in the information, get a first draft, and then tweak it some. But I find it interesting. Now, I've mentioned on here that last fall, I chaired sort of the committee that ran our high school reunion. reunion. And one of my committee members, when we were asking among us who's going to do what, and I said, we got an invocation. Who wants to do the invocation? I had a friend said, I'll do the invocation. And I thought he did a very good job at the invocation for the reunion. And I told him afterwards, I thought, you did a very good job at that. He said, thank you. He said, I actually got the first draft off AI. Okay, well, he's not a pastor. He's just trying to get a first draft for the invocation, but he got a good invocation from that. So I'm really of two minds on this.
Well, and again, I know that lawyers use things like ChatGPT and Grammarly and those kinds of things. These are tools to be used, but sometimes people become addicted to them.
Yeah, I think even maybe it was the Pope that issued a statement about the morality of ChatGPT, because you've had these awful, we've all railed against social media for years and the effect that it can have on young people and sort of their psyche. But now you're getting things like ChatGPT that's telling kids, it's okay if you want to kill your parents because they tried to give you less screen time. And so you are having religious leaders speak out and say, let's take a look at this from a moral perspective and realize, like, this is not, we're going on a bad route here. The article is about pastors using AI, and I think it's, like you said, I'm a little bit of two minds. There's a great tool perspective of it. It can do fact checking. It can help make your writing more engaging. I know some pastors that are a little dull that could use some spicing up of their Sunday morning sermons. But, I'll offer I shared with you guys earlier, we start our Monday mornings at my office with a staff devotional. And so my turn was up this Monday morning, and it was a busy week last week. And I thought to myself, I should just have ChatGPT do this. And then I thought, no, that's entirely not the point, because I would miss the sort of blessing that is engaging with the word and seeking wisdom from the Lord and what do I want to say. So I hope pastors do realize, maybe we can originate a first draft ourselves and then use ChatGPT to clean it up or to fact check it and things that just take time, but there's not more than 24 hours in a day. So I'm equally of two minds like you. It's a good tool, but can be abused really
And I guess
easily.
I wondered in part, do pastors in certain denominations, are they more likely to do it? Are pastors of liberal churches more likely to do it as opposed to conservative churches? Would a Bible church do it as much as, say, just a standard church or an old mainline church? I just don't have any idea, but it would be interesting if we found that out.
Or a resource size comparison is a congregation of 50 members using AI more heavily or less heavily than a congregation of 50,000 members. So that sort of mega church versus one room.
And it's an important point, because some pastors are full-time and that's their job.
Right.
Others are part-time. They work a full-time job and they have they're filling in for pastors or churches that have small congregations that can't afford a full-time pastor.
Again, it's certainly something that we might be talking about, maybe even after the break, because we want to get into, of course, this commentary by Penna Dexter. But it is interesting that nearly 2/3 of church leaders surveyed who prepare sermons say they use AI tools in their sermon writing. I would say there's a difference between Grammarly checking your grammar and ChatGPT writing the whole thing. So obviously we recognize that. You've got Microsoft Copilot. You've got Google Gemini. This goes into it in some detail. It might be something for you to print out, maybe even pass on to your Sunday school teacher, your pastor, and say, tell me about what's going on here, because it is fascinating. We'll come back and make some final comments about that, and also want to get Holly's comments about Penna Dexter's piece on women's sports right after this.
On January 13th, the United States Supreme Court heard oral arguments in two cases that are arguably the most important of the current term. At issue are laws passed in West Virginia and Idaho that protect female sports. According to these laws, only biological females may participate in women's sporting events. The American Civil Liberties Union challenged both laws in court. Their attorneys contend that these laws violate the civil rights of transgender athletes who are biological males seeking to compete with women. But on multiple occasions, these attorneys refused to answer a basic question asked by the justices. Here's Justice Samuel Alito questioning Kathleen Hartnett, the attorney representing a male Boise State University cross-country runner. For equal protection purposes, he asked, what does it mean to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman? Her answer, we do not have a definition for the court. Justice Alito asked a follow-up, how can a court determine whether there's discrimination on the basis of sex without knowing what sex means for equal protection purposes? Washington Post columnist Megan McArdle argues that these evasions do not help the trans inclusion cause. She says the left's contention that sex is not binary, but a social construct, a spectrum, an incomprehensible mystery, leads to an obvious problem. The case becomes not so much an argument for trans inclusion as it is for abolishing women's sports. The law, she writes, requires clear definitions. Alliance Defending Freedom agrees. In an email explaining their key role in both cases, ADF points out that a basic understanding of the differences between men and women led to the creation of women's sports in the first place. That same understanding led more than half of the states to pass laws protecting female athletes from having to compete against males. Megan McArdle says the left's insistence that gender identity always trumps biology probably means their side will lose this case. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and I just might mention that the commentary today by Penna Dexter, women's sports case, is one that we're going to talk about in just a minute. My commentary today is about socialism and capitalism, which relates very much to the fact that if you receive our Outlook magazine, and if you are a monthly donor, you'll receive the Outlook magazine, the February issues on socialism and capitalism, because we have a few mayors in New York City and Seattle that are socialists. We have a few members of Congress that are socialists, and the most recent Barna survey said that 1/3 of even people that go to church believe socialism is preferable to capitalism. So we need a little bit of education on that regard. But first of all, Holly, I thought I'd get your thoughts. This, of course, has to do with the case before the Supreme Court. Oral arguments were heard earlier this month on laws passed in West Virginia and Idaho to protect female sports. That is, I think, intriguing because, if nothing else, there was a real attempt to try to protect women. And now this has gone before the Supreme Court. And some of the rather vague answers from those who were trying to actually argue against these laws weren't exactly helpful, according to what Penna points out.
So the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, was challenging a law in West Virginia and Idaho. And don't ask me which one belongs to the other, but one of them was a law that made high school athletes play their sport that corresponded to their biological sex, and one of them was, I believe, college athletes. So the issue was the same at minimum, and it was basically the Supreme Court was answering a version of, is this allowed under the Constitution, and can you require athletes to play the sport that they are sort of born that sex? And I would encourage, this is kind of a side encouragement, listeners should go and find the audio of these Supreme Court arguments. I think sometimes the Supreme Court can seem kind of this mystical Washington, D.C. body that hands down laws that change the country. And I would encourage people to go listen to that for themselves. I'll warn you, this one is a marathon when it's two cases like this. So you can probably just listen to the first one and call it good. But Penna's commentary did a good job explaining the ACLU has some serious problems in the arguments they're making because they cannot define some of the critical terms. And that is something the Supreme Court is likely going to hone in on. The justices, if you listen to the argument, either are signaling to the advocates what they want them to clarify for the opinion that they're already sort of mentally forming in their head, or they're asking questions as a way of convincing the other justices on there, right? Because you have to get 5 votes to win. And so I suppose that what Justice Alito was doing in this circumstance when asking the ACLU lawyer, what is your definition from a woman? He probably knew that she wasn't going to be able to answer that. And he likely sort of asked that with the intention of displaying that reality to some of the more liberal members of the court.
If I remember right, in her hearing, Justice Ketanji Brown was asked that question and said, I think she said, I'm not a biologist. And so it gets even up to the Supreme Court where this is just a simple question. To Holly's point, if you can't determine between what is a male versus a female, what is a man versus a woman, I don't know how you can determine anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, part of that issue gets back to Title IX and a few other things. Yep. I've used you as an example because I think most people know you're an athlete and certainly can appreciate that. And yet the argument is what has opened up, I think, female sports, women's sports, has been things like Title IX. And everybody knew what sex meant back in the 1960s. I think everybody today knows what it is, even the people that say they can't answer the question. And when you've had the previous administration, especially the Biden administration, argue that we can redefine words like sex and gender and also use then various laws about anti-discrimination, then we're living in this world where anybody can be anything at any time with any definition, and that's not the way to run a law.
Absolutely, and that's why this case, yes, obviously is going to determine whether these laws in West Virginia and Idaho are constitutional and whether we can make these sort of rules at the state level. But it's also, I think, going to have other far-reaching ramifications because they are going to have to wrestle with this definition of sex. So this could affect how we keep people in prison. I know that is something that has kind of been an issue in the trans movement, I guess you could call it, is what do you put someone that's identifying as a gender in a prison with someone else, or just locker rooms aside from sports arenas, camp housing, university housing. This decision is going to touch all different areas of life that has anything to do with sex segregation. And it likely won't be decided until the very end of June. So that could be, it feels like a long wait, but I'm hopeful with this court it'll be worth it.
But, you know, the government, at least in the past, had contracts and would prefer women-owned. I had a friend who was a woman who had a certified female women-owned business. And so if you're getting contracts from the government, but you can't tell if you're a woman or not, or if a man can step up and say, my name was Jerry, now it's Jennifer, and I want to get that female contract now.
Well, that illustrates two problems, both the inability of that group to define what a woman is and also the tragedies that come along with affirmative action initiatives.
Yes.
But that opens a whole other can of worms that at 2:53, I'm not sure that we have time left in the show to get into.
Don't have time to get into that, but let me just mention that this, as you pointed out, Holly, could go, if it goes the wrong way, it is like a row of dominoes that will fall. And if you go to our website, of course, we have all sorts of things from our registration for our meet and greet, but if you go down, you see Pray for America, and one of the things we've encouraged people to do is pray about some of these Supreme Court decisions. And one of those is this, because if this goes the wrong way, and we all know what the wrong way is, and I don't think that it will, you are talking about much more than just whether or not boys can participate in girls' sports, because I don't see any girls participating in boys' sports per se, but it also has to do with locker rooms and, as you said, Christian camps, and has to do with all sorts of anti-discrimination laws and on and on and on. So this is a very important case. But since we're praying, let's also talk about a case that you have before the Supreme Court, Gabe Olivier, because that's a case that we have been talking about, and give us an update on where we are.
Like many cases at the Supreme Court this term, it's in the waiting game. So just like BPJ, like I said, the Supreme Court tends to decide sort of the more controversial type of cases toward the end of June. So that's when I expect a decision on these gender cases. I mean, if you will recognize, your viewers know that Pride Month is June. That's because that's the month that the Obergefell decision was handed out. So that becomes kind of the Supreme Court Watchers Month. If you're a Supreme Court nerd, that's when all the big decisions, I'm sure some of the tariff decisions will be there soon.
We were hoping that was going to come out in January.
Right, I thought there was a chance, and it didn't. So I wonder if it's going to get pushed late. You know, the justices do their drafting and passing along and negotiating. So that's what's going on at the court right now. And in the meantime, everyone is just praying for multiple decisions: tariffs, gender, all sorts of things.
And again, we haven't even got into tariffs, so that's next week, and I'll leave that for
Let's
some others.
open another can of worms at
That
2:56.
is for sure. And I think it's a good illustration of the fact that it used to be that Supreme Court would wait till June, announce their most controversial decisions, and then head off to Europe.
Go to vacation. That's right.
There are so many
Get out of
controversial
Dodge.
ones this
Right.
time. Are they just going to load them all on the last day?
Yeah.
I do not know.
Busy
but
day to be a Supreme Court reporter.
So, if nothing else, that's why if you haven't signed up for our Pray for America, I would encourage you to do so. Those of you in Georgia, if you would like to have a chance to have a meet and greet and have some good barbecue, that is the case. And as you've picked up, I'm going to be gone for part of next week. I'll be traveling around Georgia, and I'm looking forward to meeting with people in Macon and Warner Robins, and I think we're going a few other places, but nevertheless, that's going to be a great opportunity. So I want to thank both of you for being on the program today. Megan, thank you for engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Enjoy the weekend. See you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.